I would say the best go-to-market engineers today are really deep experts at using tools like Clay, and therefore also really deep experts at vibe coding prototypes of something, even if they have no coding background, right? Ultimately, the flip side of the coin of a growth hacker is what I call like a figure-outer, someone who will just figure it out.
Today's episode is about GTM engineering with someone who knows this role better than anyone. Yash Tekriwal was the first GTM engineer and is now head of education at Clay, the startup that pioneered GTM engineering and is now valued at over $3 billion. So with that, welcome Yash. It's great to have you on.
Thanks. Great to be here, Pascal.
So everyone talks about go-to-market engineering, but few know more than maybe the definition of what it is. So maybe to start, right, you guys at Clay pioneered go-to-market engineering. Can you tell me the origin story of what it is and where it came from?
So it must have been almost 2 years, a little bit over 2 years ago, which is kind of crazy now to think about. We were very much in the early throes of getting our PLG motion really working. So we had been focused as a company for quite a while on having a strong PLG motion because for us, it really mattered to have strong user feedback. We were trying to create something that was widely applicable, even if we wanted to scale it into the enterprise vertical. And so everything was at that time a lot of hand-to-hand combat. We had a tool called Sifton linked up to our Slack. Me, Varun, Patrick, and Eric were all just like looking at all the Reddit threads, commenting on people about Clay, talking to people on Twitter, trying to really solve for, at that time, the core use case was data enrichment. And we have a marketplace and we have a waterfall approach, and we can basically reduce / eliminate a lot of the manual work that people were still kind of doing in an archaic kind of caveman style way of like, let me upload and download my CSVs between different tools. Fast forward, to let's say August 2023, and we have enough traction and enough revenue from the self-serve side. We think we can continue to see it growing in a really effective way that we are now thinking, okay, it's time for us to start exploring what a top-down sales motion looks like, because all we had at that point were self-serve plans, self-serve tiers, and we had a pretty strong thesis that for more complex enterprise clients, we can layer on like a true enterprise offering. So my task at that time, when we had no salespeople, no RevOps people, nothing, was essentially to go out and try and sell and figure out like what our enterprise offering was going to be. And so I can also talk about some of the different stages of what that was, because we did not nail it right on the first try, to be completely candid. But the term go-to-market engineer came from a little bit of like a pushback between Varun and I. Essentially, it is way too much work for one person to handle the complete maintenance, especially of all the PLG data in there of a CRM. We were using HubSpot at the time. That was basically a full-time RevOps person's job. And also for someone to do all of the like inbound scoring, call tracking, deal stage analysis. That is more of like a salesperson plus a RevOps person's job. And for someone to like build the sales playbook, figure out the sales offering, and do the sales thing themselves, which is really what an AE like BDR type role looks like. And so I was feeling a little bit under the water, but we committed to this experiment of, I have a really deep background in low-code technical tools. That's part of why I joined Clay in the first place. And we basically got to, I would say, not maybe a perfect with just me doing it because we had so much data, but more than sufficient status of our systems with me using Clay to do all the inbound scoring, to do all of the CRM tracking, to then also be able to hop on the calls, do all the research that I needed to, and have really fruitful discovery calls with these people. And so we arrived at this conclusion that in the era of AI, tools like Clay, and also others, quite frankly, are collapsing some of the manual work that used to exist at the intersection of all of these roles. So why don't we coin a new term, make it unique to our tool, since we're dog fooding it quite frequently, and see how it sort of feels. And we started to find that resonates a lot with people in the market. It's also polarizing. I know just as many people who will tell you GTM engineering is a fad as people who will say it's just the next evolution of RevOps. Ultimately, I don't really care about where you fall on the fence. I do think the thing that everyone is aligned on is the role is changing, and therefore the demands, the skills, and the requirements for being good at it have changed.
What is your definition of a GTM engineer, and how do you actually think it actually differs from the classic definition of what RevOps is?
I think it's also worth noting that at that time, right, we had this definition of a GTM engineer for ourselves as someone who is both selling and in the systems and technical. So think sales engineer plus RevOps plus salesperson. I would say in the years since, as we have sort of implemented GTM engineering functions at a lot of our enterprise clients, more common that I see is actually a blend of RevOps, a blend of like, how do I put this cleanly? Sort of data analytics, data science, data engineering, and then a blend of like growth hacker. And we also have an internal team of GTM engineers that we use for this function. Those people are actually the ones architecting Clay, CRM, data warehouse, plus Slack and all the other tools that we use to then enable all of our sellers. And so the definition keeps shifting, right? The target keeps moving because I also think it's worth meriting that at different stages of company, what a GTM engineer is focused on is likely very different. But the definition I would give to a GTM engineer that makes it a little bit distinct from RevOps is that RevOps is really focused on keeping the ship running. So, okay, we have the ship, and that's typically why RevOps is not a function you hire until later in a company's stage of growth. You need to first have revenue to really operate on the revenue. There's less of a growth hacky element. There's less of a growth thesis behind RevOps. It is, we have a ton of customers. We have a ton of existing activities, outbound, inbound, ABM, you name it. And we need to not only keep all of the data that informs each of those activities clean, we then need to also help with territory planning, forecasting, account mapping, all of this other sort of functional data that helps enable the rest of the team. The big difference with GTM engineering, and this is where you get into the debate between people about whether or not it's a new term, is that I think you are now adding on the ability for those people to also be a growth center. So RevOps is now being added into an experimentation laboratory. Now, the same people who are maybe performing some of those functions that I just talked about are also able to say, what if we test this outbound campaign? What if we made this update to the lead scoring mechanism? What if we thought about what information we're routing to the salespeople differently? What if we added a whole new dimension of that information? That expanded capability turns RevOps from a maintenance function inside of an organization to a true growth lever.
I think one of the things that stuck with me when we last chatted was you said, right, increasingly we need to treat go-to-market like a product. And right, it kind of go-to-market engineering fits into that almost as like an engineering approach to building go-to-market strategy. Can you maybe elaborate a little bit more what you mean by the go-to-market function should be increasingly treated like a product?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this recently too, right? If you think about the history of sales, because I spent a fair bit of time in sales earlier in my career, it's always been a very individual sport. Yes, you're part of a team, but even that team, if you're in like a larger sales organization, you're sort of in competition with your teammates, right? You're looking to see who can get the best deals and therefore get the best commission and close the fastest and hit quota for the quarter. And therefore, a lot of the talent in sales is highly concentrated to individual players. People are safeguarding their like outreach secrets, and they're safeguarding like their tips and techniques for how they might find new leads. I think that this idea of treating go-to-market like a product function, because product has to be a team sport, right? You have multiple teams working on multiple elements of the same cohesive product. It has to be more collaborative by nature. You need to keep other people in the loop on what you're doing so that the changes that you make aren't interfering with something that someone else might be working in a different part of the product. That's what a big crux of what I mean by treating GTM like a product function, right? It's turning it into a team sport because now, instead of everyone being individually responsible for how they generate lead or pipeline or think about deals, they are jointly responsible for communicating with the GTM engineering team on what are the issues we're seeing out in the field, what are the complaints we're getting from customers, what are the patterns or trends that we are observing as the customer team front lines. Think of those people like PMs almost, right? The salespeople play a PM function. And then now you have the true engineering function that ties back to your go-to-market activity, which are your GTM engineers. Those GTM engineers listen to the feedback from the PM equivalent of a salesperson and then say, what are the best frameworks, automations, workflows that we can build and utilize to capitalize on the feedback we're getting from the customer front lines? So I think that's part one of what it means to treat your GTM team like a product organization. Part two is maybe more intuitive to people, which is that you should always be running experiments. And I think what has historically slowed GTM teams down from running experiments is the combination of the fact that it's been an individual sport. So you're not running experiments across the whole team. You're running experiments across, 20 different people randomly, and it's hard to disentangle whether or not that success is due to the experiment or due to the charisma of the individual. And second, it took so much time that if you have to pick between looking at and carefully measuring the results of your experiments versus are we just getting revenue in the door, you're going to pick revenue every time because that's the lifeblood of your business. But now in a world where we can deploy these types of workflows and automations sort of at the speed of light, like I can build in a day or two what used to take teams weeks to just go through manually themselves. That allows for us to actually have the space and bandwidth to think more critically and carefully about what we're doing on the customer front.
Maybe I had to double click just quickly on the experimentation side of things. What are some of the experiments that you've either seen others run or that you guys have run? Just to give people a bit of a flavor of what they could look like that have actually yielded some interesting results that they're maybe not as intuitive for folks that haven't really thought about this yet.
I'll give you 3, right? So I think number 1 is if you are a business that is fortunate to have enough inbound volume. And when I say inbound, by the way, I don't just mean people actually accessing an inbound form for an enterprise sale on your website. I also mean product signups. I mean any sort of demonstrated interest towards your brand or your business that you can pick up on. It also means website visitors. It also means mentions on socials. So that's what I'm categorizing as inbound, which we can come back to. For that, we are constantly reevaluating our score on inbound. And this is a little bit unique to our size or stage of company because whenever we end up dequeuing leads that we then pass off to maybe a support team or to a sales assist individual, and those people end up actually closing leads at relatively repeatable and consistent values, that's an indicator to us that we need to reevaluate what we're doing with inbound. And on the inbound side, another experiment that I'll mention is you can experiment with all the socials and all the website visits, right? Do you want to use the website visit to then reach out to that person directly, book a call with that person, and after that call, try and multi-thread? That might be a better approach when you're a smaller team with less inbound interest because every single person interacting with your company matters. As you scale and grow the company, you're going to have to prioritize. You're going to have to say, okay, we only want to send those types of messages to people who have actual decision-making capability or influence in an organization. So now we're going to start not sending messages to people who don't meet our bar on the website and instead change the context of the message and the personalization for the individuals that meet our bar and give them some context as well as to here are the other companies that look like you that use our product. So I could keep going on inbound, but those are, I think, 2 concrete examples. I'll keep it to 2 just so that we don't keep rambling. I think the other big one that most people are using at the 0 to 10 stage is outbound, right? If you don't have people naturally understanding your product and your business, you need to go tell people about it. And so on the outbound lever, you should always be experimenting. Basically, every month, you should have a set thesis on a set number of campaigns to specific parts of your ICP with assumptions on if we are able to write personalized copy that specifically focuses on the individual and has some level of flattery, what do we think the response and meetings booked rate is going to be? What if we do outbound instead based on events? What if we only wait for when people have a fundraising event or when somebody hires new devs or when somebody changes jobs at a company? What does that kind of outbound campaign look like? What does it look like if we actually scour socials and then look at mentions of a company online and then use those mentions to reference something that our software or tool solves? And especially if you get stuck brainstorming these things, my biggest recommendation to people is use AI. AI is the best brainstorming companion. Chat with Claude, chat with ChatGPT and say, here's my business. Here's what I do. Here's what I've tried. What else should I be trying? What have I not been thinking of? That will be your infinite supply of experiments to run on outbound. And then from there, you always want to double down on the campaigns that are working because they have a set expiration date. The one type of copy on one type of campaign will last you a few quarters at best. And then it's going to become tired. And then the market moves in a different direction. And I think the other last point on outbound specifically that I'll make is that sometimes things come full circle. So for example, if I am sending really hyper-personalized copy to a bunch of small business owners referencing Reddit threads where their services have been mentioned or asked for by people several times, and the ultimate CTA is you should be advertising on Reddit, come work with me and my agency to do it. That might work really well. And then it might become tired for a bit because people are pursuing other growth avenues. But the interesting thing about growth is that just because a growth idea is past its time does not mean that that idea can then be revived. I think we're seeing that pattern somewhat now with in-person events and COVID, right? We had a lot of things go online and everyone wanted remote and everyone wanted to see what mass accessibility was. And in-person was kind of dead as a growth vehicle for a bit due to external forces. It's come back. And I'm sure that there will probably be another dip in the cycle where people are like, I'm tired. I just want to like quick access the recording, see it online. And so you have to be really on top of what's the zeitgeist at the moment.
A big part, or a much bigger part of what a go-to-market function is increasingly the tech stack. And so maybe let's start with Clay, because right, you guys are an essential part of the go-to-market kind of engineering, or just go-to-market tech stack in general. What is it that people mainly use Clay for, kind of as a starting point?
So what's tough about Clay is that there are so many different things people use Clay for because it's a flexible tool. And so my advice to everyone asking about tech stack is actually not to focus on tech stack independent of like GTM. It's almost like if somebody asked you, what is the most interesting thing about you? It's hard to come up with that because you're drawing from too many different possible parallels, right? If I instead asked you, what's the most interesting thing you've done at work in the last week? Those additional constraints are actually going to help you give me a better answer because now I'm narrowing your scope of creativity. I think the same is true of go-to-market, right? Like go-to-market includes TAM sourcing, CRM, ABM, inbound, outbound, on the boots grounds, events, conferences. There's just too much. So what's most important for most companies is to think first, what are the growth channels we really care about pursuing and why? Once you have those growth channels, then I can give you like a pretty good recommendation on tech stack. And there's two segments to that. There are elements of your tech stack you need to have for every go-to-market organization, no matter what element of growth you're pursuing. The most basic one there is a CRM. You need some place to store, access, manage, distribute your data across the whole team. The second one is you need some way to put data into that CRM. And at its simplest, Clay is the best way to do that. I'm biased, but it's because you connect all the providers in one place. And it's because you have the AI web scraping that fills in that last mile of data, and it's all in one tool. Now, if we get more specific, right, about like different channels of growth, maybe there's actually three tiers to this, right? There's things you need for everything. Then there's things you need across multiple things. And then there's things that are very channel specific. So multiple things, for example, I would say you need an email sequencing tool. If you're going to be doing emails en masse to a bunch of people, Clay now has a native sequencer, but depending on the volume of what you're doing, you might need to use an Instantly or a Smart Lead or an Outreach. Email sequencing, in my opinion, is relatively commoditized. So it's just about which one is the best fit for your process and which one gives you the delivery on the best analytics that you need. Another one might be an omni-channel tool. So I would need Lemlist, or I would need La Growth Machine if I wanted to be doing LinkedIn DMs, or if I wanted to be messaging people on Instagram for certain business models, or if I wanted to be calling people. Calling people, speaking of, I would think about AirCall, I would think about Dialpad, I would think about Nooks, because these are all tools that enable your sellers to call more effectively at scale. And then as we narrow our way into each of those different growth channels, I'll like pepper a couple of examples across the ones we've mentioned. For inbound, you need really good lead routing. Some companies for basic inbound get away with using Clay's functions to do this, or formulas. If you really need account assignment, routing, lead management, I've also seen people use Chili Piper. I've also seen people use Lead Router in Salesforce. And then for outbound, if you really need a tool specifically to help you crack sequences because you want to run 3 to 5 step tools, there are great integrations in Clay now that do this. Or you could go to the tool its own. So you could go to, there's Twain, there's Octave, there's a couple of others that I'm blanking on at the moment, but you can actually find them in our tools directory. And then I could keep running down this list, right? For CRM enrichment, even an edge case of that growth channel is how do you resolve parent-child hierarchies and duplicate accounts? There are packages in the Salesforce marketplace that specifically do just this. It's like Convert Optimize or Track Optimize is the name of the one that I last saw. But we could obviously keep running down this list and then get into more and more tools. But that approach and some of those core functional tools, CRM, email sequencer, data warehouse, data enrichment, are the basics that any business needs.
Any other tools or kind of anything else that I need to consider from a tech stack perspective? Either what I need to consider from a tech stack perspective or any other tools that you want to highlight. There are a lot of folks listening who are just getting kind of started with this world that are worth at least looking into from their end.
If I were just getting started as a founder today, the big balance that I would want to tiptoe is you want tools that automate the boring manual parts of what you do, but you also don't want to over-index on automating away the value of you being the founder or you being the first 3 team members actually looking through all the information. So the concrete example I'll give here is Syften, which I mentioned before, it's Syften, is like a social listening tool. You can also do this with Trigify now, I believe. And so in the early days of Clay, it was actually just helpful because we only had 3 people who were working on the business side of the business to just have a Slack channel that was dumping information constantly. I can tell you today, I did not read every single thread that went through that Slack channel. It just was not possible, but I did my best to read as many of them as possible. Right. Another good example of this is Slack is actually, I think, like one of the most underrated tools people think about when it comes to GTM, because almost every founder is starting on Slack. When you're early in a company's journey, Slack is your central knowledge hub and brain. And so when you don't have that many sales coming through, right, when you don't have that many product signups, what we did is we linked every single new product signup and their email to a Slack channel. And so every day you could see, every couple of minutes, a bunch of emails signing up for the product. And early on in our journey, I was actually looking at every single person who signed up, because if anyone signed up from a domain that I thought was interesting or a company that I thought we could look more deeply at, I reached out. I emailed them within seconds of them signing up. And that was not automated, actually, right? That was done manually because there was also value in the manual understanding of what is the breakdown of people that we're getting. And then we have a similar channel that we still sort of have today, but no one really listens to it. It's now more for enterprise deal. It was called Ring the Gong. And Ring the Gong is essentially whenever a customer closes a paid plan or converts, then we also send that customer's information, the price of the plan that they paid for, the type, whether it was annual or monthly once we had annual in there, and who they were. And then we could also include information like how many days after their free trial did they convert? Was it a reactivation from a previously churned customer? And so we automated the parts that were like, okay, it would be impossible for us to get this data manually at scale, but we did not automate away the processing of that information until the team size grew to a point where we needed to focus on higher level objectives.
Now, I think we're to make it even more nuanced. Let's think about go-to-market engineering across kind of different stages of early stage company building. If I'm a founder who's still kind of in the 0 to 1 stage, how should I think about both go-to-market engineering and go-to-market engineers, right as I'm kind of still ahead of the first million in revenue?
If you're at the very earliest stages as a founder, you basically have 2 paths. And this is up to you as a founder to decide. Number 1, you need someone who is going to be like your first business hire if you're a technical founder, or you yourself, if you are the business founder, need to become this person who is just your sort of growth at all costs, growth no matter what focused individual. In many ways, Varun was that person for Clay, right? Kareem is our technical founder and he's the CEO. And then Varun came into the business and was like, let's figure out how to grow this thing, right? And Varun doesn't really touch the product, doesn't really touch the engineering. He's obviously involved at the level that someone of that stature needs to be in product decisions, but you just need to be playing the go-to-market engineering game yourself. That's the first binary choice to make. Your second choice to make is do I hire a go-to-market engineering person? And my advice here, they end up collapsing into the same thing, because either you need to be this person or you need to hire this person. Look for what I would call a full stack go-to-market engineer, and don't necessarily look for is he really good at outbound or really good at inbound or really good at one of these things. Look for someone who is going to be able to figure it out. And my favorite way to do this is actually throw a problem at people that you might be evaluating that you just know they have no familiarity with, and tell them, I know you have no familiarity with this, right? What I want to see is your ability to quickly understand, learn, and then figure out what a viable solution here might look like. And so what you're really indexing on there is that at that stage of the business, you simply don't know what's going to work out and what's not going to work out. So you want the flexibility of somebody who is going to be able to adapt quickly with you in the business. And then my last, actually, bonus addition to this is going to be, I recognize, having been in this position before, those people are harder to find than you might think, because you're basically asking for someone who has a co-founder type persona and ability and grind, but at a first higher level of equity and comp. And so if that's the case, your next best option, if you can't find that unicorn individual, is to basically double down on a bet for how you want the business to grow and just doggedly pursue that for a bit. This is another good Clay tie-in where we made the decision. We wanted PLG growth and process before we did anything on the top-down sales motion. So that narrowed it in for us. right? And that's a, elusive thing to chase. PLG is a magic force when you have it, but it narrowed in the focus of what Varun and Eric and Patrick and I were doing early on in those days, where we just said, okay, in order to try and create general buzz about the product, we need people to be talking about us because they want to, not because we told them to, right? So therefore, we need to make the product so magical that they get so excited that they post about it. Therefore, what we need to do is when we hop on these calls with people, if they're finding it complex, what we need to do is tell them, you take over the screen actually and share your screen. I'm just going to point you to what to click so we can get you to feel that magic moment of fun that people were really having with the product early on. And so that last point is you can hire someone specifically on like a broader go-to-market thesis you might have, just accepting that if it really doesn't work out, half a year to a year down the line, you may need to part ways, or you may need to ask them to adjust and shift, even if you haven't screened for that capability ahead of time.
If I decide as a founder to do it myself, and I'm not familiar with these tools, and right, I'm not fully sure with regard to the ICP yet and everything, there's a bit of a learning curve to learning right how to use all them. Kind of what's your recommendation there? And then also there's quite a bit of a cost, right, to get all these subscriptions and everything. What do you see people do if they're in that situation?
I'll break this into two parts, right? There's the 0 to 1 million part, right? When you're going 0 to 1 million, my honest to God advice is be as thrifty on the tools as you need to be, because you can get by 0 to 1 million on Google Sheets, Slack, and like a couple of other cheap tools. You can also use, I would probably still recommend you use Clay to automate the boring parts, but you probably don't need one of the more expensive plans. You can probably get by on one of the like medium to lower expensive plans on a self-serve basis. And also, I mean, maybe people would kill me for saying this, but it's true, right? You probably don't need to be using Clay continuously at that stage. So you can like buy a subscription for a month and then use up your subscription, pause it, and then restart it when you need to. So just at that 0 to 1 stage, get by on using free to low cost tools is the honest answer. Once you start to see traction happens at different stages. So like if you go 0 to 500K in 3 weeks, which we're seeing a lot of AI companies do, that's traction, right? So like don't hold fast to this 0 to 1 million rule. It's just more about the speed of growth and the pace of growth. That's when you need to start thinking about systems. And so when you need to start thinking about systems, number one, the most important thing, actually independent of all of this, is get a CRM. CRM, I would even advise you to do at the 0 to 1 million stage, actually, just because if you're a startup or a founder, you can get these free, deeply discounted plans from HubSpot or Salesforce or Attio that are built to help grow with you as a business, right? They're like 80% off the regular cost because they know that startup founders can't afford really expensive tooling because they're just trying to figure out if the business will exist. Once you start to scale what you're doing, manual hand-to-hand combat, let's just assume, because it's most popular for most businesses, that you start outbound. And then, you're booking meetings for a bit. You're probably using Clay plus a sequencer or the sequencer inside of Clay now to do your like mini outbound campaigns. It takes you a quarter or two, maybe 3, to get to a point where you're like, I'm feeling the market pull. We're booking more meetings. People are more interested in talking to us. I feel like the rate at which we are holding meetings every week and then converting them has gone up 2 to 3x. Now it's time for you to start thinking about, okay, do I bring on somebody else or do I teach myself using the resources available to me, the skills that I need to think about how this system will grow with integrity, because you can't duct tape things and expect them to scale to 10 million.
So you are at that point, right, kind of in the next step of the journey. You're at that point, things are starting to work and everything. What are signals that I need to start to look into hiring go-to-market engineer? Kind of what's the right moment in time? How does that potentially change depending on whether it's an outbound motion or an inbound motion or anything else?
Let's cover outbound and inbound since those are the two most popular. For an outbound motion, the clear signals are you are booking more meetings than the team is able to handle, right? Or you're booking so many meetings because early on, right? This is what I mean by the definition of GTME changes at different stages of a company's growth. Early on in a company, dream is if you can have somebody selling who is also really good at building these systems. As you start to hit traction, that person's time is going to have to either be dedicated to more full-time maintaining the systems or to more full-time selling. If that person needs to more full-time sell, that is a perfect indicator that you just need to think about starting to add headcount. And it's the choice is yours, right? Does that existing person want to be more in the sales-led direction? Do they want to be more in the systems direction? Up to them. You then hire the counterpart, right? The other big signal from an outbound perspective is simply that you're starting to close deals at a higher and higher velocity, right? That means it's a channel with real ROI that you should be doubling down on. And so if you could be booking even more meetings, therefore the potential exists for you to be accelerating the progress on what you're seeing, that means you need more outbound happening and more people to handle that outbound because you're already at full capacity with what you're doing today. Right? You can look at the standard numbers for what salespeople are typically able to handle. We have sort of broken these in the ways that we've grown the company, and that's because people can always go a little bit further for a short period of time when they're doing intense work. But when I was doing all of our inbound systems as our first salesperson, there were weeks where I was taking like 20 to 25 calls a week. And that's an insane, like that's just not a human number of calls to be taking, quite honestly. And to be quite honest, I dropped the ball on several of them, which is going to be my third point for outbound. If you are dropping balls in certain places and those balls are being dropped not because people are incompetent, which I don't think I was, it's just because they simply don't have enough time. That is the biggest indicator that you just need to hire better systems or more people. And then you can actually take each of those and sort of flip them onto their logical equivalents in the inbound world, right? So if you're starting to see a lot of leads get DQ'd that you're DQing incorrectly, someone needs to readdress that system. But if that someone is also still too busy taking the calls, you need to have someone more focused on the systems. If you're seeing that you're getting a lot of qualified leads, but those qualified leads are booking meetings and not progressing, that's probably a sign that you should be investing in better sales process, work with a sales consulting firm, work with some experts. We had a couple of really wonderful experts early on in our enterprise sales development. Dakota McKinsey and Trey run a great firm. I highly recommend them. There's tons of really great sales consultants out there that are really good at dialing in on what should your process look like once you have that initial traction to say, I do have a problem. Because when you don't have the traction, your problem is getting to traction. When you do have the traction, your problem is sustaining and continuing to accelerate it.
Say I blow past the $10 million mark. I'm truly starting to scale my whole sales organization. As part of that, how should my thinking about go-to-market engineering change when I get to that stage?
There's also two answers here, right? So I think what's new here is that we are in the era of hyperscalers. Like if you are a Lovable or a Bolt or a Cursor, where like you've truly blown past $10 million, some of what I'm talking about is impossible for you to do because you also cannot risk diluting company culture and quality at the pace at which you would need to hire to be able to sustain that money. So you need to figure out, one, how to hire really, really quickly while also figuring out how to scale systems really, really quickly. So if you're blowing past these revenue marks, my biggest piece of advice is specialize fast, 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 right? You can't really play this like generalist person who slots into a bunch of different functions because at that pace, that generalist person is going to have to focus in 2 weeks if they want to do any part of what they're doing really, really well. If you can manage to find generalists who are equally good at being specialists in multiple domains, that's beautiful. You've built an incredible recruiting function. That's one of the things that I think has made Clay very successful, actually, but that's very hard to do. The second part to your answer is, let's say you've blown past it, but at a reasonable pace, right? You're now at 10 million. You're now starting to scale the team. At 10 million, you should have a team, right? You probably have a handful to 2 handfuls of salespeople. You probably also have some sort of a marketing function. You probably also have some sort of like a RevOps GTM engineering function. Don't care what you call it. Then you need to be thinking about, okay, where is there room for improvement, right? Like you need someone to be optimizing. And so you either have ideally someone who's your head of sales or your head of marketing constantly thinking about where those functions are going next, and then working with your co-founder or CEO on continuing to steer business direction from both a product and a go-to-market perspective. And then those theses need to trickle out throughout the organization. So for example, let's say this is true from like a Clay journey perspective as well, right? We did not always have, actually a very recent example, sequencer. This was past the 10 million mark for us, closer to past the 30 million mark. But I think the patterns are the same actually, from like 10 to 50, 50 even to 100, and how the organization works. We were getting a lot of customer feedback from people about, we would just want a native sequencer. We want to make it easier. We put that off for a while because, like I said, sequencers are relatively commoditized, and we want to continue to build net new functionality that adds value, doesn't just compete with other products and then drain engineering resources. However, at the same time, another piece of feedback that was coming from the customer front lines is it's really hard to draft emails with AI and Clay. The way people used to do it was archaic. We had to have you generate an AI snippet in like every single column for each sentence that you wanted to be writing. And then you had to be a good enough writer to think about how to paste those sentences together. You had to create an AI formula for it. And then you would send that blob of text over to a sequencing tool. Unless you are someone with a deep computational or systems thinking background, that is not coming intuitively to you. And so because that was a more important problem that also allowed us to dovetail with the creation of a sequencer, we put two in one. And so that's why we launched a sequencer in many ways, because we now are making the copywriting experience and therefore the entire outbound experience in Clay significantly better, which is important to our product division, while also knocking out a couple of other birds with one stone. And then we keep that tie-in from what product evolution is doing back to the sales team, because everything needs to be working in tandem at 10 million, where you are selling what you have today. And then as you close those deals, you need to be listening to customer feedback and listening to customer pains, also talking to your customer success team about how do we continue to expand these people? How do we expand the surface area of what they're doing? What is the right order of operations? That needs to go back to product, which goes back to engineering. Engineering builds it. New features come out. You retrain the sales team and you retrain the marketing and success teams to be able to deliver on new value as quickly as possible. And then that loop keeps expanding and expanding, right? That's when at 10 million, you start to consider what are the other product verticals that continue to earn us money. And that's the kind of loop that I think about.
How do you think about go-to-market specifically as part of that, right? And the product, quote unquote, that you're building around go-to-market. How does go-to-market engineering typically sit in or fit into a go-to-market organization? Like, what are models that you've seen that work well?
Yeah, so this is actually where we're still sort of in the wild, wild west, right? Like I think there are multiple types of models that can work well in an organization. I will give you like two major examples of it that I've seen. So number one is you have sort of like the most analogous to a centralized PM function where there's a lot of feedback coming in from all the teams. And so that's primarily marketing, it's primarily sales, it's primarily customer support and customer success. And then there's a core hit team of really top-notch go-to-market engineers that are intaking all that information, putting them all into, let's say, a Notion table or an Airtable, and saying, based on business impact, based on the number of people this touches, based on deal size, increase velocity, et cetera, here's our given list of order of priorities that we're going to work on this quarter. And here's what we're not prioritizing. There's a discussion between customer teams and that team about whether or not that's correct. Once the priorities are set, you're off to the races every quarter to try and build the things that matter the most. And so some examples of things that we've done using this structure, because this is how we operate at Clay today, is we've generated like pre-call meeting prep docs, right? We noticed not all of our salespeople were doing all the research that they needed to on all the calls that they needed to, because it was just too damn hard. Like we had a good problem. There's 10 to 12 people getting meetings on their calendars every week. It's almost impossible to do the follow-ups and do the prep that you need to at scale for that. Clay is built for that. So now every salesperson on the Clay team every morning gets a digest directly in Slack of who are the people you're meeting with, what are the companies that they work at. Here's a link to a doc that has research on who they are, what they care about, what the company is doing, any relevant signals, and also our recommendations on what exact demos to be showing them on that first call for the use cases that they've stated. Right? And I could keep littering this with examples, but just to give you an idea of the other format that works really well for go-to-market engineering is you have embedded go-to-market engineers working committed to different teams. One of the drawbacks of we have the nucleus go-to-market engineering organization is that you are always going to get pulled in the direction of sales and enterprise customer growth because those dollars and those deals really matter. And so it does become very hard then for, I can even say this myself, getting go-to-market engineering resources for the education team, we know it's important. And also it's very hard for me to say that not prioritizing the enterprise workflows is going to be of higher importance than all of the cohorts workflows that we have. That's also true of marketing. And so actually part of how we've done it on education, part of the luck for us is that I was also a go-to-market engineer. So I built all of our education systems early on. And now we're in the phase where we have someone else who is kind of just like a dedicated go-to-market engineer for the education team, working on all of the education-oriented projects. So that person has less visibility into the rest of the organization, but the trade-off of benefit that we get is they are so dialed in on all the things that we are building in education. They know the intricacies of our Airtable workflows. They know the intricacies of the Clay tables that enable credit spend for new customers. They understand the very specific back-end API calls that we are only able to make to our software to be able to give customers the features that we want to do training at scale. And there are tons of organizations that have more of this embedded go-to-market engineer approach, like intercom is the biggest one that comes to mind. There's a couple others I'm not sure if I can name, so I'm going to refrain from it. But I think it just depends on like where your organizational priorities are, what the organizational culture is. And my last advice on this like go-to-market structure / framework is that it's a relatively reversible decision to go one way versus the other. It's a little bit easier to go from I have a central hit team of go-to-market engineers to I am going to temporarily embed some of these people in specific teams. It's sometimes a little bit harder, I would say, to go from I have embedded people to now let me get all these people to work together and then go back. So that if you don't know which one to pick, especially early on in an organization, I would start with the central nucleus because it's easier, it's simpler, and it also introduces this prioritization level across the team.
A very important question is, if I'm a founder looking to hire a go-to-market engineer, what are my ideal candidates? And like part of the question that I always ask myself is how technical does a person need to be versus how much just tool understanding, kind of no-code, low-code experiences is needed here. What else should I prioritize?
So if you're looking to, just to make sure I understand the question, right? If you're looking to hire go-to-market engineers, what are the skill sets to prioritize, right?
Yes.
So
and what to consider, when I look for that role for the first time.
Well, so here's where I'm also going to include some other like non-Clay information, right? Like I would say the best go-to-market engineers today are really deep experts at using tools like Clay, and therefore also really deep experts at vibe coding prototypes of something, even if they have no coding background, right? Ultimately, the flip side of the coin of a growth hacker is what I call like a figure-outer. Someone who will just figure it out and is so good at thinking in systems and thinking first principles, Misi style, that even if they don't know how to code, with all the tools that we have available to us today, they will research, ask the question, figure it out. And so what I will say is that there are tons of things in this space that are strong indicators, but not causational indicators of this ability to think. And I can give you an example from Clay as well, where early on in the Clay journey, we used to be puzzled about how there were there's a pattern. More often than not, people with an engineering background understood Clay almost instantly, but there's still like 20 to 30% of people who have software engineering degrees and get into Clay and they can't make heads or tails of it. And after enough time, I have come to the realization, talking to thousands of customers at this point, that just because you have a degree in software engineering does not necessarily mean you have flexible computational thinking ability, right? There are some people who are really good at just learning the tool and learning the language, and then they're experts in that specific application of the skill, but they, for whatever reason, haven't built the translatability of their skills, right? So they haven't thought about, okay, just because I know how to write if statements and for loops and variable assignment, that means I'm using the same concepts in Clay or in Lovable or in V0. They're just really good at it in just the environment that they're in. And while those people are really great when you have scaled a company and you need like someone who is the best in class at what they're doing, they're not really that helpful if you're not sure if you need that skill set early on in a company's journey. Instead, the archetypes that I look for more frequently are people who I call them tinkerers, right? Like they're always playing with new things. They maybe have like what I would also call shiny tool syndrome, which is both a good thing and a bad thing. But if someone is constantly like, what are the new tools out there? Like if they love experimenting with what's on the cutting edge, that is an extremely high signal that they are really good at picking up new things. And that also comes with drawbacks, right? Like you're going to need them to have a certain level of rigor and application and commitment to even the hard parts of what you're doing. But I would much rather work with trying to get someone who already has the mindset you need to really hone in on the spaces that you want for go-to-market engineering versus the flip side of like, you have a skill set, but I'm struggling to get you to translate that to new tools and systems that will be flexible as we grow.
What are profiles, outside of kind of engineers that typically work well in a go-to-market engineering role? Maybe less technical profiles.
Yeah, I would actually say engineers are not even the ideal profiles in my mind because often they're really hard to kind of get out of that first archetype. I would say the most successful profile I have seen, there's two. One is somebody who has been like a deeply technical user of a non-coding tool for a while. And so there's variations on this. Like I would say anyone I've met who is like a Zapier expert or a Make expert or, any of these other automation tools now like Lindy, Gumloop, typically, again, not always, but typically very, very good at picking up other tools similarly. Then there's all these other buckets of tools that are similar. So there's Adalo. If you ever hire a bubble expert, I have not yet met a bubble expert who does not instantly grasp clay, right? Then another version of this would be people who have honestly, data archetypes, right? Like data archetypes are really, really good at thinking through things logically from these first principle standpoints. And they typically have some level of code experience. So if they've worked with SQL or if they've done data science before and they're just interested in switching career paths. I actually met a candidate like this very recently. And I gave her an exercise in clay that would be way above average for the for a new person that I am introducing to the tool. She picked it up like this. And I'm like, I'm not surprised because I know sort of how your brain works. And then the last thing I would point to is actually, if it sounds boring, but it is true, people who have been CRM admins or Salesforce admins typically also have this all right, I know how to think about really boring problems in this MECE first principles logically exclusive way.
What about salespeople that actually understand, right, all the sales processes and everything incredibly well and have kind of the receiving end of what these tools are supposed to deliver in terms of making their jobs and lives easier?
This is actually going to probably change with clay at some point, but I don't think it changes this question, right? We actually, for a while, sort of explicitly told people, don't give this to your AEs. Because I would say, on average, really good AEs have gotten really good at what I would call as the craft of selling. And so it doesn't necessarily mean, even though they have sales process understanding and how to navigate human situations, what really great salespeople are actually really good at is some of the subjectivity of trying to force a deal around the corner and all the creative thinking. So those people are actually also really good GTM PMs to a GTM engineer. If they don't have any background with any of these tools that I just mentioned, they struggle often with clay. But the easy solution here, because you're correct in assuming that the dream is to find someone who has sales experience, frontline customer experience, and can then go do all of this stuff in the background, give them a clay assignment, right? And you will then weed out, or give them if you're not using clay, another sort of technical workflow building GTME assignment, and see how well they do on it. Not just on building the workflow itself, because now AI is good enough that they could probably do it without fully understanding it, but also walking you through how they built it, why they built it the way that they did, and explaining what problems they hit along the way. When I'm interviewing people, I get so much value out of asking them to tell me, what did you mess up here? What did you really struggle with? And how did you overcome it? Because that kind of gets to this problem solving ability. And that's ultimately what you're looking for. And then the last thing on the salesperson is that there are tons of people who are what I would call sales hackers. So if you can find a salesperson who's had some time as a BDR, but then just didn't take the status quo systems for granted and got really creative and started using, maybe in basic ways, a Zapier or a gum loop or a clay, that's a pretty strong indicator that you might have found someone who could become that unicorn human for you.
To almost come full circle, where do you recommend if a founder or operator is listening today, says, okay, I have to figure out go-to-market engineering, what are good places to go, and where how do they best get started?
If you're going to want to figure out go-to-market engineering, I'm going to give you a couple of resources. So number one, we have Clay University. There's tons of courses on there, even just at the higher levels, actually, about what is a go-to-market engineer? How should I think about go-to-market engineering? These questions we've talked about on this podcast, we have all this content there. If you don't see content there on something go-to-market engineering related that you want to see there, shoot me a LinkedIn message because I will consider making it, right? That is what our team handles. We also have a Substack called the GTME at Substack that I think we release different sorts of weekly digests on different topics related to go-to-market engineering. So those are the two big Clay resources I would recommend. The footnote is going to be that in Clay University, we also offer a bunch of programs. So there's live online trainings through a program called Cohorts. We also have templates, Clay books that are a little bit more in the weeds and tactical. Now, let's also talk about some of the other emerging resources around go-to-market engineering. Eric Nowoslawski has a wonderful YouTube channel that is, I would say, the best place to go if you just want deep in the weeds technical explanations of crazy Clay table builds. Equally viable to Eric, increasingly so, is Patrick Spachalski. So Eric runs an agency called Growth Engine X. Patrick runs an agency called The Kiln. And Patrick's videos are also really, really good. I would put his more on the kind of crazy creative ways to think about go-to-market engineering tools. For example, I'll never forget this. He has a great YouTube video that is him using a Clay table to create his meal prep schedule and training schedule for his marathons because he's a marathon runner. So those YouTube channels are two of my favorites. And then the other resources I would point to are actually, there's tons of agencies out there now that are really bringing forward go-to-market engineering as a practice for organizations. And so these are people who are building services businesses on the cutting edge of what go-to-market engineering is. A couple that are top of mind, and I hope I don't insult anyone by not remembering them, but Jenna Gartwa from, why am I blanking on their name? Go Nimbly. Okay. Full Funnel, Matthew Iovani. Who else is really good? Lean Scale. Antonio and the team is really great. Those are the top of mind ones at the moment. And just so that I don't insult any of the experts, you can always go to clay.com/experts and just go find each of these individual agencies' websites. This also has a double benefit. If you are a founder early on, something we have not talked about is trade cash for expertise, because you don't have to go through the process of training, upskilling, taking a risk on a new hire that's going to be embedded in the company, especially at that zero phase, actually, when you're just experimenting. Work with an agency that you really trust gets you, because they already have the expertise. They've worked with tons of companies like yours before, and they will probably help you at least validate or invalidate the hypothesis of which channels you're looking to go after with which go-to-market engineering tactics you want. And if you work with the right agency, they will transition the systems that they build over to you when you hit the inflection point that you know you'll need to start thinking about this more full-time.
100%. And I guess I'll also plug Jay from the GTM Ops agency, who's done a lot of that work with our portfolio. And he's also absolutely amazing. So that was super helpful. If we maybe recap it, right? And you mentioned a couple of things already here, but to recap it, like, what are the top 2 or 3 things founders should consider kind of when they want to start thinking about go-to-market engineering or want to lean into it, or maybe mistakes to avoid? If it's just 2 or 3 things, not more, what are the absolute essentials?
So let's just do 2 or 3 things for founders at any stage of 0 to 10, right? Any stage of 0 to 10, if you're a founder, number one thing to focus on is automate the manual, but don't automate the important. Your whole team, even if it feels like a fire hose, should be processing all the information, because you want to be as close to the customer as possible. So don't overdo it. Number 2 is if you can find some of these unicorn hires that I'm talking about who understand the business really well and are flexible across the stack, invest in those people and make them a core part of your team, because that will help you grow tremendously, which then leads to number 3, make bets and experiment early on. Don't double down on avenues that you're not 100% certain of. And if you're unable to find those number 2 hires, think about evaluating and working with agencies who can quickly help you get information. Don't cost cut or optimize on either the full-time hire or the agency, because the most valuable thing you can save is your time, right? So if I can save 3 months on learning from an experiment, that's 3 extra months of burn, right? There's opportunity cost that you need to consider at every stage. So those would be my 3 biggest recommendations.
And now, you've already mentioned a couple of examples, but what's the most creative example of something you've seen a GTM engineer build that you've come across?
There's so many. That's part of what's so exciting about the space and part of why I love it. Like, I really do think it's not just marketing from us, that like we are encouraging people to lean into their creativity. I see it every day. I'm going to pull a couple just straws out of a hat for you. So one that I've seen us do for a warehouse shipment delivery company is they wanted to figure out the total warehouse capacity of frontline workers in a warehouse. And that data doesn't exist on the internet, right? What they did was they basically took and scraped Google Maps searches of each warehouse address, took the Google Maps satellite image of that location and the date, tried to find it during the midday, because you can get a couple of different options, and then use AI to analyze the image from that Google Maps satellite image to look at how many trucks were actually parked in that warehouse spot during operating hours, and then use that number to estimate total frontline worker capacity, and then use that in personalized outbound to say, hey, it looks like you could still hire 20% more people, or look, you could still hire 30% more people. That's crazy, right? That's a wild thing to do.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing.
And this is like, I use that one because it's one of my favorites in recent memory. And also, like, I truly mean it when I say the only limit in today's era of tooling is your creativity. Because if you can do it really creatively and super manually, that's the other thing that I would say for everyone in go-to-market engineering. It's hard to come to that workflow that I just mentioned without first being like, how the heck do I get this information? someone went through and was like, all right, what if I like Google it? What if I like find the image? It's like, oh, what if I count all the trucks? Like, there was a really manual process that happened before we were like, aha, now we can automate that manual process. Another really good, I'll give you two more examples just to round it out. One that's also very creative is like in the Medicare, or actually, yeah, we'll give four. So medical example, right? Healthcare. It's nice sometimes to know what the hospital bed occupancy is and what the like throughput rate of the hospital is. You can actually then look up hospital floor plans. You can look up average floor capacity per size. You can use an AI web scraper to estimate volume based on the square footage. Think about the number of beds and think about the number of wards on a hospital's booking site. And then pretty accurately, within the right order of magnitude, think about how many beds a hospital might have available on average. And then you can get capacity from NIH data sources. So then you can also get hospital throughput. Another really big one, because most people have to either buy very exclusive data sets to this or they have to go do it manually themselves. Government and district budget spend, right? If you're selling an ed tech, if you're thinking about education, you want to know exactly who the superintendents are, the influencers and decision makers. All of this information is publicly available online because it has to be. But no one wants to go through the like Carolina State County database to go look at the 3-year plan for that county and then look at the budget allocation and then compare it to the resources. It's incredibly manual. You can do it with AI now. You can do it in Clay. And then I'll leave with like my personal example that I still use today, even though I don't sell actively anymore. Just to show people the power of Clay, there's a video I posted on LinkedIn about this a long time ago, where my main demo of Clay is I just drop in somebody's LinkedIn profile URL. That's all I need. They fill out a 1-question form. From that form, I can then figure out the size of their company, the industry that they work in, what the company does, who they are, what their background and history is, what they care about. If they have it on their LinkedIn, what their hobbies and interests are. I use all of that to generate a single page Google Doc that has everything I've talked about them. And then I send it to their email. So I'm like, look at what I was able to get about you. And that always blows their mind. And the cherry on top is I send them a LinkedIn message as well that says, thanks for connecting. Here's my stalker doc. Let me know if you think this data is accurate or valuable because you saw what I used to get it. And bonus, here is a custom meme that I have made for you based on your career history. And the custom meme always hit because I'm using the LinkedIn profile to generate personalization for them.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. Appreciate you sharing that.
Of course.
So you've been through quite a wild ride with Clay, Redis. They're kind of first go-to-market hire, first go-to-market engineer. You now run education. What were some of your personal kind of major learnings from this complete kind of roller coaster / rocket ship over the last couple of years?
There's a bunch. I'll share 2 or 3 as I've been doing this whole time. Learning number 1, this is maybe more personal, is that operating at a high caliber and high degree of intensity is always going to be hard and get increasingly harder. I think there was a period of time at the company where I'll be super candid, right? My first 3 months at Clay, I dramatically underperformed. I was supposed to do our data analytics infrastructure and engineering work to set us up, and I was just garbage at it. It wasn't like anything I had done in the data world before because I never worked with a true software product. And so it went poorly. And so then after that, I fell into a better stride doing marketing and doing sales and doing all this other stuff that I'm much better at, I think, in that core domain. And so I'd say learning number 1 is like, don't beat yourself up too much over things that maybe are out of your scope when you're working at like a high intensity, fast scaling company. Pivot and adapt and find where you fit. Number 2 is going to be that you have to be okay with what you are good at dying and changing every 3 to 4 months, right? Like I've done a lot of things, to your point. And part of why I've done a lot of things is because, one, even if you want to stay in the same track as you're growing throughout a company. So like, let's say when I had started doing the sales motion, I had been really gung-ho, which I wasn't at the time, about like, I want to like grow and scale a sales team. Even in that world, I would have had to be like, okay, I've never been a sales manager before. I've never been like a head of sales before. I would have had to figure out, am I good at these things? Are we just going to hire someone else to do it? Where do I want to see myself growing in the organization? And that would have been a hard journey, and I maybe wouldn't have been able to do all those things, right? Like we now have a wonderful head of sales. I was watching her do a training yesterday and was like, damn, she is great. Then like, I don't even know if I would have been the right person for that. So there's like some level of ego death that has to happen at the company in order for you to figure out what you're going to be best at. And that changes. That ego death happens a lot. And there's a mourning and a grieving process that happens at a hyperscale company, which then leads to my third point, which is you should always be thinking about what is pushing the boundary of what you're doing while still maintaining the existing capabilities that have gotten you to where you're at. And that, I think, for me, is something I still struggle with today, right? We have, for university now in the education team, we touch cohorts, IRL events, docs, certifications, courses. And there's a certain amount of work we need to be doing to just even keep outputting all of that at the level that we need to be doing it, because it has to keep up with our product. It has to keep up with our customer base. And that is necessary work. But that also, after a quick enough time, becomes work that is not necessarily growing the company, right? So I am always tiptoeing this balance now of how do we make sure we are properly resourced across the things that we need to do because we know that they're successful and they maintain consistent growth. And also, what are the big bets that we're taking next quarter? What are we really sinking our teeth into? That's an experiment that's going to say, okay, for us now it's this IRL event stuff. It's leaning into more types of cohorts because those are the things that are really pushing the envelope for us on how does the team grow, what makes it fun for the team, and also what is the most beneficial to the business overall.
Last question from my end. Knowing what you know now, is there anything that you go about differently or change?
There's so many things that I would change. I'm going to give you just one answer for this one because I think it'll be the most prescient. The biggest thing I would change, this is actually something, I hate to give Kareem credit here, but I'm going to give Kareem credit here, that Kareem told me when I was early in doing the sales work. There is this tension between let me just try and do all the things and also let me let things go so that other people who are not working with me can see the pain of what I'm talking about. There was a period of time when we invented the go-to-market engineering role where for like every other week, the thing that I was dropping would change, right? So one week I'm dropping a couple of customer calls and then customers are complaining. And so I overcorrect. And the next week I'm doing all the customer calls. But then that week, people are complaining about the CRM quality in our CRM and why deals aren't updated and in progress. We fixed some of that through just inventing this go-to-market engineer concept and me getting really good at using Clay to do it. But I do think if I had just said, I'm going to only focus on the customer calls and like do the bare minimum I can outside of that to maintain the CRM, that makes the problem really obvious to other leaders in the company, right? So what was hard, I think, for Varun or for Kareem at that point in time was to say, well, which one's more of a problem? Because every other week, Yash is oscillating on which thing he's dropping. If I had just said instead, here's my number one focus and priority, I'm never going to drop this because that's the most important thing. And that would have clearly been customer calls at the time. I am going to take as much time as I can to cover the surface area that's possible of the CRM and the data analysis, then the problem becomes really clear and then it becomes easier to solve. But if you are constantly fluctuating in which balls you are juggling, it becomes hard to decipher where do we need to add extra resources to make this even better.
Focus in general is and focusing on the one thing that truly matters is something we talk about with our founders a lot. Everyone understands it conceptually, but doing it in practice is a very, very different story.
Very different.
This is a great place to end. Thanks so much for coming on, Yash. This was amazing. Really appreciate your time.
Of course. Thanks for having me, Pascal. Love the conversation.